Chanuka is coming up, and we always try to find some connection between the parashas we're reading and the Yontif that we're about to celebrate. So there have been many, many attempts to show that there are themes in these stories of Yosef, the parashas of Vayeshev, Miketz V'Yigash, which relate to the Chanuka. So I'd like to attempt to bring out an idea. Maybe we talked about it in the past, maybe not, I can't remember. But that there is something very, very deep in these parashas, which in a way relates to Chanuka, which is the subject of dreams. Dreams figure very prominently in the parasha. Really, there are three sets of dreams that we discuss. We have the dreams of Yosef, the two dreams of Yosef, that he and his brothers are harvesting grain, and Yosef's sheaf rises and stands up, and all the brothers' sheaves bow down to Yosef's sheaf. That's Yosef's first dream. The second dream, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to Yosef. So these dreams apparently convey the idea that Yosef is meant to be the king, he's meant to hold a central position within the structure of the Jewish people. So these are Yosef's dreams. And it's very, very, very interesting how Rashi learns the parsha. Rashi learns that everything Yosef did was to bring about the fulfillment of the dreams. It says that when the brothers first presented themselves in this week's parsha to Yosef, it says that Yosef remembered the dreams and he accused them of being spies. So what's the connection between remembering the dreams and this accusation of being spies? So Rashi understands this way, that Yosef remembered the dreams, that in the dreams 10 brothers were brought out to him. And he counted, and or rather 11 brothers brought out to him, and he counted, and only were 10 brothers, because Binyamin wasn't among them. So he remembered the dreams, he realized this wasn't the fulfillment of the dream, and therefore what he had to do is figure out some way to get Binyamin down. So apparently the dreams are important. This was Yosef's motivation to bring about the fulfillment of the dreams. Then we have the dreams of Paro. The two dreams of the 7 cows and the 7 ears of grain. And of course Yosef interprets these dreams as referring to the years of plenty, the years of famine, and of course this leads to Yosef's promotion. But Yosef only gained his reputation as being an interpreter because of another set of dreams, and in the last week's parsha, which he interpreted while he was in prison, the dreams of the Saramashkim and the Saraofim, the wine steward and the butler, and he interpreted those correctly. Those dreams at first glance don't have cosmic significance, except for the fact that they led to Yosef's release from prison, because now that he had a reputation as a dream interpreter, and Paro needed to have his dreams interpreted, so therefore Yosef was called upon. So we have 3 sets of dreams. Yosef's dreams, the dreams of the Saramashkim, the Saraofim, the wine steward, and the baker, and then Paro's dreams. And Yosef interprets all the dreams, and acts upon them, and rises to power, and the story, of course, is well known. Now, dreams are very interesting things. A dream is not the same thing as a prophecy. A prophecy is the communication of a substantive message. God wants to tell you something, so God reveals himself to you and gives you a prophecy. Prophecies in turn can be conveyed in many different ways. They can be explicit, they can be in a vision, but there is a message which God wants to communicate to the prophets. Sometimes the prophecy is conveyed in a dream. Because while a person is asleep and having a dream, God communicates a prophecy. The dream of Yaakov Avinu, back in Parshas Vayetze, the dream of the ladder, was a dream, but it was a genuine prophecy. It was a genuine prophetic dream. God communicated to him a substantive message that he would protect Yaakov, that he would bring him back to Eretz Yisrael. Ultimately, that was a genuine prophecy. These dreams are not so. Certainly not the dreams of the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ophim, and not those of Paro. They certainly aren't on the level to receive prophecy. But even the dreams of Yosef are conventional dreams. Conventional dreams. Now, dreams can have a nugget of truth to them. There are all sorts of dreams. There are dreams that are merely residue of the day's thoughts. There are dreams that are triggered by outside stimuli. And there are dreams that are implanted in a person's head by spiritual forces, and they can have genuine meaning, but not in the sense of a prophecy. Not in the sense that a prophecy has a very specific meaning. Dreams have a range of interpretation. There is a range of interpretation. And the Gemara says, Kol hachalomos holchem achar hapeh. All dreams follow the interpretation that they're given. Meaning a person can have a dream. If he interprets it this way, it'll come true. If he interprets it that way, that will come true. It all depends how you interpret it. And it's very interesting to know that the Gemara in Chulin talks about the dreams of the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ophim, the baker and the wine steward, and gives them totally different interpretations than Yosef gave. The Gemara in Chulin says it refers to the Jewish people, and the three clusters refer to the three Batei Mikdash. The Gemara gives totally different interpretations. So the Maharsha and the Gemara in Chulin says, wait a minute. The Gemara is giving new interpretations to these dreams, but Yosef already interpreted the dreams. So the Maharsha says, no, a dream can have many interpretations. Kol hachalomos holchem achar hapeh. That was the interpretation which Yosef gave, but there are alternative interpretations, and more than one can be true. So Yosef gave one interpretation, and the Gemara gives a different interpretation. Not a contradiction. Now, obviously, there are interpretations which are just not true. Now, you have a dream, and you can interpret it in a way which just doesn't fit the dream. That's obviously not a valid interpretation. So the interpretation has to be a real interpretation. It has to account for the various symbols and what is observed in the dream, but there is a range of interpretation, and the interpretation you give it will come to pass. How can that be? Like, the angel or God who put the dream in your head, what did he have in mind? What he had in mind is to give you a set of options, which you can choose. Because when you play chess, right, we have a chess game, two opponents in the chess game. So the move that my opponent makes creates a set of options that I can exercise. I can't move my pieces any way I want. First, I'm constrained by the rules of the game. I'm constrained by the position of the pieces. And a move you make will affect my options. If you check my king, then I can't attack your bishop in the far flank. I have to protect my king. I have to remove the threat. So the rules of the game, plus the position of the pieces, they create the set of options which are available. But there are options. I can save my king this way, I can save my king that way. I can move my king, I can put a piece blocking the attack. I mean, there are various tactics I can use, but the configuration of the board sets the options that are available. So a dream is also that way. A dream creates options. God says, here's a dream. The dream has a range of interpretations. You choose the one that you want. You choose the one you think is best, which is totally subjective. And that'll come true. And it comes out that really it's an amazing thing that Yosef, by giving the dreams the interpretations that he did, really might have been not just responding to a message, but actually changing the course of the story. Now, many years ago, we discussed this in a class, and we said that Yosef is criticized for having exerted a little bit too much effort to secure his freedom. And the question is asked, what did he do? He just asked the Sar HaMashkim, put in a good word for me. that when you get released and get your old job back, go to Paro, tell him that there's a Jewish boy in jail who was imprisoned unjustly, and put in a good word. And Yosef is criticized that he's punished for this, 2 extra years in prison. I mean, what did he do? Just to make a request. So we suggested perhaps that it wasn't just he made a request. Yosef turned the whole thing around. As the Gemara in Chulin says, the dreams in the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ofen had nothing to do with the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ofen. Yosef created a whole scheme that Sarah Ofen should be executed, Sarah Mashkim should get his job back, in order that he should put in a good word. Really, the dreams had nothing to do with it. So that is quite an ambitious exertion of effort to better his own position. So perhaps he could be criticized for that. We explained also on another occasion that Yosef's attempt to fulfill the dreams as his own dreams by becoming the viceroy of Egypt was also probably not the genuine interpretation of the dream. But think about it for a second. Yosef has these dreams of becoming king. And it says that Yaakov Shamar es Hadavar. Yaakov was anticipating, he was waiting for it to come true. Let's think about this for a second. Let's say a friend of yours has a child or a grandchild, and you want to give a bracha, give a blessing to the person. You go to the person and say, "Oh, I wish you, Yiddish nachas, you should have such satisfaction from your child. Someday your child should be the viceroy of Egypt." I mean, think about it for a second. For Yaakov Avinu, that's like a source of satisfaction, pride, that his son is going to be the viceroy of Egypt. But it says that Yaakov heard the dreams of Aviv Shamar Sadavar. He was anticipating, he was waiting for it to come true. And what did Yaakov think the dreams meant? It must be, Yaakov must have assumed that the meaning of the dreams was within the structure of Klal Yisrael, Yosef will be the king, not that he'll be the viceroy of Egypt. That's undoubtedly what Yaakov thought the dreams meant. And therefore Yaakov was anticipating, he was hoping it should come true, because Yosef was the son that he held had the most potential. Yes?
So that when he gave the brachas at the end of his life, Yaakov, he said that Yehuda is going to be the king.
Wait. Explain that. So therefore, that's what Yaakov was hoping for. So what is Yosef? Yosef is scheming to have the dreams fulfilled in his brothers bowing to him as in his position as viceroy of Egypt. Because what happened was Yosef came to a quick realization that his attempts to place himself over his brothers were not going to be successful, and to the contrary, they were going to bring division and conflict within Klal Yisrael. And therefore Yosef abandoned his plan. But Yosef realizes, wait, but the dream has to have an interpretation. So Yosef hatched a tremendous scheme. If I could bring about that the dreams will be fulfilled in my role as viceroy of Egypt, then they will not be fulfilled within the structure of Klal Yisrael. And that's exactly what Yosef did. Because it isn't that this was really the meaning of the dream. This was not the original meaning of the dream. This was the interpretation that Yosef gave the dream, and therefore, by giving it that interpretation, he made it happen that way, and thus, he spared Klal Yisrael from a schism, a division, that would have crippled it for all time. It's an amazing thing you think about it. But this is the idea. Dreams create a set of options, and you choose the option that you believe is best. It's a very interesting thing. Yaakov Avinu, when he had his dream back in Parshas Vayetze, that was a genuine prophecy. There were no options there. God communicated a message. This is the message. There's one message. There's one meaning, one interpretation. That's the way it is. Says dreams are different. Dreams open themselves to various interpretations. And that's what Chazal say. Kol hacholim sochan achar peh. They are fulfilled in the way you interpret them. The Gemara tells an amazing story about a dream interpreter named Barhadia. He was a dream interpreter. And people would go to him. People would pay him and get good interpretations. People that would ask for a favor would get bad interpretations. This is a lesson to people that go over to doctors and shul and solicit free medical advice. It might not work. You might get bad advice since you're not paying. But this is what the Gemara says. The Gemara tells a Maisa that Abaye and Rava had a series of identical dreams. Identical dreams. That night after night, they both had the same dream. And the Baya paid, and Rava didn't pay. So Bar Haji interpreted the dreams one way for Abaya and one way for Rava, and the interpretations came true. And it was uncanny that Abaya was blessed with good fortune day after day after day. He got good interpretations of the dreams. And for Rava, everything went wrong. And finally, what happened was, in the end, Bar Haji was walking, and he had a little scroll in his pocket, and it fell out of his pocket, and Rava picked it up and handed it to him, and Rava noticed that on the scroll was written the words, Kol ha'chaloimes holchen achar ha'peh. All dreams follow their interpretation. And then Rava put two and two together, and he figured it out. That really all that misfortune didn't have to happen. It was only because he hadn't paid, and therefore he got bad interpretations. And the Baya did pay and got good interpretation. It's a fantastic story. Bar Haji met an untimely death, as the Gemara goes on to explain. We'll take that for another time. But there's a range of interpretations. Now, this really is an amazing, amazing thing when you think about it. We're not going to get back down with the details. I just want to present an idea, which is a fantastic idea. You know, we look at the nisyonos of, let's say, Avraham Avinu, the tests of Avraham Avinu, and compare them to the tests of Yosef. Every person's life has nisyonos. Everybody has tests in their lives, right? Nobody goes through life untested. But let's compare the nisyonos of Avraham Avinu, 3 generations earlier, and the nisyonos of Yosef. The nisyonos of Avraham, of course, Chazal say Avraham was tested with 10 tests, fall into 2 categories. One type of test is Avraham is told by God to do a very difficult thing. God tells him, he gives him explicit instructions, do X, and it's nisayon because X is very difficult. So for example, lech lecha, to pick himself up and go to Eretz Yisrael, it's a very difficult thing. So that was a nisayon. The Akedah is of course the ultimate nisayon. You know, take your son, slaughter him, offer him as a sacrifice. It's a difficult thing. So those are certain one variety of test. He is told to do a very difficult thing. Another variety of test is he finds himself in a situation which is seemingly inescapable, and the test is, will he doubt God? Will he harbor resentment against God? So for example, there's a famine in Eretz Yisrael. The only solution seems to go down to Mitzrayim. But the question is, will he have a taina? Will he have a grievance with God? I mean, God brought me to Eretz Yisrael. He told me everything's going to be great. And all of a sudden, there's a famine, and I have to run to Egypt to escape the famine. So that's a different type of test. But it's not a test that Avraham Avinu has to decide what he should do. Not the question. Avraham Avinu's actions, his decisions, are made for him. Either because he receives an explicit command, or because the situation doesn't allow for any other options. In the one case, the test is, will he rise to the challenge and do this very difficult thing? In the other case, the question is, when he does what he has to do, will he have resentment and will he be angry with God? That's a different type of test. But Avraham is never challenged with a test of what should I do in this situation. Now, in the one situation where it almost seems that there was a decision that had to be made, God took the decision out of his hand. Where was that? When the question was, what to do with Yishmael? Right? He has a problem within his own house. Right? He has the righteous Yitzchak, young boy, very fine boy, studious boy, righteous boy, pious boy. He has an older brother, 13 years older, who's very wicked, he's an idolater. What do you do? And by the way, this is a nisayon. This is a nisayon that people have nowadays. So you have a situation, you have children in the house, and one of the children is a studious child and a religious child, and he's with the program, so to speak. The other child has religious issues. And keeping them under the same roof becomes a challenge. What do? And you have situations where the father may say we should do this, the mother may say we should do this, and now it becomes a marital problem, right? Because the father and mother don't agree, and now their marriage is on the rocks. And this is more common than you think. Maybe not more common than you think. It's quite common. So we seem to have such a situation in the Torah, right? Abraham says, let's keep Yishmael at home. Sarah says, send him away. And we understand why they divide along these lines. Because keep in mind, Yishmael is Abraham's child, but not Sarah's child. Right? Remember, Yishmael's mother is really Hagar. So it's easy for Sarah to say, send him away. And Abraham says it was difficult, because this is, after all, his son. And when you reflect on those psukim, and you really feel, wow, this is a tough decision. How is Abraham gonna save his marriage? And how is he gonna deal with his older child, the younger child? And you think, that's a big decision. He has to really rack his brain and come up with a resolution. Comes the Ribono Shel Olam and says, no. Whatever Sarah says, do what she says. Listen to her. I'm taking the decision out of your hands. Whatever she says is right. And not just on this one occasion, but as a rule. Whenever you disagree with her, she's right. That's how Rashi learns. Rashi says that Sarah is not right in this instance. So Sarah is generally right because she was greater than you in Ruach HaKodesh and divine inspiration. So whenever you have a disagreement with her, listen to her. I don't think that necessarily establishes a binding precedent. Listen to your wife, but in this one instance, that's what it says. Now, so the point is that Avraham Avinu never has to make a decision. Right? His nisyonos aren't to make decisions. His nisyonos are to carry out God's directives, and it's a test of how he's going to respond to what circumstances compel him to do. Well, those are both difficult tests. But there's a third type of test. There may be other types also. But there's a third type of test, which is to decide what to do. To decide what to do. You have a tough decision, and there are considerations, pros and cons. And sometimes neither is an optimal choice. And there are going to be genuine losses, whichever way I go. So how do I decide? What do I do? What's more important? How do I prioritize? Now, these are the tough decisions of life. Avraham Avinu never has to make decisions like that. That is not the way in which he's tested. Becomes Yosef, and Yosef has no guidance. Yosef is the first of the biblical figures who is not a Navi. He is the first of the biblical figures that God does not speak to. God speaks to Abraham, he speaks to Yitzchak, he speaks to Yaakov. If you go back, certainly, Adam and Noach, God speaks to. Right? Yosef is the first major biblical figure who is not a Navi. God does not speak to him. God gives him dreams. And what are dreams? Dreams are just a range of options, as we said. In other words, they set the options, but you have to decide now on a course of action. That's a totally different type of test. And this is the first person who has such tests. That's Yosef. When you think about it, it's a fantastic thing. It's a totally different scenario than we've had in the past. In other words, here, he really has to agonize and decide, what should I do, and what is the correct course, and suffer the consequences. Let's think of his greatest test. The test of the attempted seduction by the wife of Potiphar. And, there probably was no test in the entire Chumash. It is more difficult than this. He's a 17-year-old boy. No one is going to know. He's living in Egypt, far from his parents, far from his siblings. This is a country where probably this type of thing is par for the course. When you think about it, don't apply Victorian standards to ancient Egypt. That would be an anachronism. In other words, probably this was very, very much par for the course, that the mistress of the house would consort with the staff. Not unheard of. And he certainly would get away with it, and Potiphar would probably even turn a blind eye to it. And Yosef very virtuously says, how can I do such a thing? How, first of all, can I betray my master? And secondly, how can I commit this offense against God? It'll be an offense against my master, and it'll be an offense against God. Therefore he refuses. And now she goes berserk, and she makes a federal case out of this. And she goes to her husband and says, look what he tried to do. So, we'll just read between the lines and dramatize it a little bit. It says, that fellow tried to. So Potiphar said, so what? That's what happens. And it says in the pasuk that she badgered him. The Potiphar did something. It was okay, we'll put him in jail. It probably wasn't a difficult decision to come to either, because you go in jail. No, there was no big deal. You're thrown in jail. People got thrown in jail for lesser offenses. The Sar Mashkim and the Sar Ophim, what did they get thrown in jail for? There was a fly in the cup of wine and a splinter in the wood, and then a wood in the bread, so they got thrown in jail. So okay, so for this, you want to seduce the mistress of the house, okay, we'll throw you in jail too. Once you're in jail, there was no due process. It wasn't like you can apply for writ of habeas corpus and get out of jail. Once you were in jail, they forgot you there. It's 10 years before you know it. So imagine you're Yosef. You made a decision. You made a good decision, a virtuous decision. Then all of a sudden you see the consequences of your decision. The consequence of this is you're sitting in a pit for 10 years. 10 years in a pit. You think about that. Did I make a mistake? Maybe I should have done something differently. Okay, I got to get out of here, right? And he hatches a scheme that he's going to ask the Sar Mashkim, put in a good word, right? Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? I'm going to do it. This is a reasonable status. This is not a lack of trust in God. I'm going to do that. He asks the Sar Mashkim to do this favor for him, and then all of a sudden, nothing happens. Nothing happens. 2 more years in prison. Yosef is constantly having to make decisions, and the circumstances are such that because the question is decisions. It's a totally new type of experience. The truth is that in the history of Klal Yisrael, we have such a transition. Once upon a time, the Nisyonis, the great test of Klal Yisrael, was not to figure out what the Ratzon Hashem was. Once upon a time, the great test was to do it. It was clear what God wanted us to do. The question is, do we have the strength, the fortitude to do it? It says later, it changed. Later, the test was, what does God really want of us? Where did that happen? Where did that transition take place? So it took place at the beginning of the period of the second Beis HaMikdash. Until that time, there was Nevuah. There were Nevi'im, there were prophets. There were people with whom God communicated and transmitted information to the Jewish people. At that point, as long as we had Nevi'im, there was no doubt. There was perfect clarity. We knew exactly what God wants of us. The question was, would we live up to it? What created the challenge? Because there was a burning Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says there was a burning urge to commit idolatry. And I think we've talked about this in the past. The Gemara tells us that this was a Yetzer Hara that was unimaginable. The Gemara says in Maseches Sanhedrin that one of the kings, one of the Jewish kings who lost his share in the world to come was Menashe. Menashe was the son of the righteous Chizkiyahu. And Menashe was so evil. Menashe was the first to bring idols into the Beis HaMikdash itself. there were other kings who worshipped idols, but he brought idols into the Beis Hamikdash. So many years later, close to the writing of the Talmud, Rav Ashi was giving a lecture, and he told the students that tomorrow we're going to discuss our good friends. Our friend, these kings who lost their share in the world to come, and jokingly he called them our friends. So that night Menashe came to him in a dream and said, "You're calling me your friend? You're calling me your friend? Like we're pals." He says, "You don't know anything." Then I'm going to ask you a simple question. Let's see if you can answer the question. The question is, when you make hamotzi, which end of the loaf do you cut? So Rashi says, "I don't know." So he says, "If you tell me, I'll say it tomorrow in the lecture in your name." So Menashe told him, "You cut the part that's baked most well done part." So Rashi says to him, "If you're so smart, why did you worship Avodah Zarah?" Now, just by the way, what is the great genius in this? What is so clever about knowing that you cut the part of the loaf which is well done? So if you'd asked me, I would have said the exact opposite. You cut the part of the loaf which is least done. There's a very, very good svar, very strong logical argument that you should make the bracha, make the hamotzi, on the part that's least done. Nobody knows? Think about it for a minute. It has to be that way. Very simple. When we thank God for something, what are we thanking God for? The raw material or the finished product?
Raw material.
No, we're thanking for the raw.
The raw material, right?
In
other words, if I turn potatoes into French fries, what am I thanking God for? The French fries or the potatoes? Potatoes. I made the French fries, right? If I turn olives into olive oil, what am I thanking God for? The oil or the olives? The olives, right? If I bake a cake, what am I thanking God for? The flour or the cake? Flour. So when I have a finished product, right, and part of the product is completely processed, and part of it is closer to the original state, and the question is, on what part should I recite the blessing? So I can make a very strong argument. You should make the blessing on the part which is closest to the raw material. So comes Menashe and says the opposite. No. Says you make the blessing on the part which is most finished. Why is that? What's the rationale behind that? Because the truth is it's a mistake. We're not only thanking God for the raw material, we're also thanking God for the ability, the ingenuity, to be able to turn this raw material into a useful product. So that's what Menashe said. That no, you're making a big mistake. That when you thank God, you're thanking God not only for the raw material, you're thanking for the ability to turn it into bread.
But isn't that part of that?
When it comes to bread, it's especially so, because the blessing makes reference to bread. Especially so.
But the same thing happens with wine and Shabbos.
Wine, no, you thank God for the grapes. Or pri hagafen, the fruit of the vine, not the grapes, not the wine.
Shouldn't it be ha'etz?
No. Either way, it's only because grapes are more. It's because wine is chashuv, has a special bracha, but you're still thanking God for the raw material of it. It's a complex thing. But whatever it was, Menashe said something very deep. So Rashi said to him, "If you're so wise," he says, "why did you worship Avodah Zarah?" So Menashe said to him, "If you would have lived in my time, you would have picked up your coattails to run to commit idolatry." So the Maharal explains in that Gemara that he was really zinging Rashi. He said like this. He said that I worshipped idols, but if there would have been something that stopped me, if I would have been restrained by something, even because my coat was too long, so I wasn't able to run fast enough, I would have been happy. It was a compulsion. We couldn't help ourselves. But if I would have been able to, if something would have stopped me, I would have been happy. It says you would have removed the obstacles in your way. You would have picked up your coattails to run to commit idolatry. So there was this Yetzer Hara, this urge of Avodah Zarah. And it had to be that way. Because when there is perfect clarity, when you know exactly what God wants of you, So what's the test of life? If you're not being tested by having to decide what God wants, what must the test be? Are you going to do things that are difficult? They have to be difficult. Right? So as long as there's nevuah, as long as there's prophecy, there is perfect clarity as to what God wants of us. It has to be that the temptation to do the opposite is very, very strong, or else there's no test. And therefore, as long as it was prophecy, there was a burning, a tremendous burning desire to practice idolatry, which means to violate the Ratzon Hashem, to violate the will of God in the most extreme possible way. And the Gemara says that when the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the people prayed that the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah be removed. Right? And they said a very logical argument. They said like this. They said that why do we have a Yetzer Hara? The only reason we have a Yetzer Hara is that we should be rewarded for overcoming it. But if we're not overcoming it, then what's the point? It's not doing us any good. It should be removed. Now, with your indulgence, I'll just tell you an amazing, amazing thought. There's a sefer called Avodas Yisrael from the Kozhn of Sir Magid, which is an amazing thought based on this Gemara, which he doesn't quote, but it's certainly based on this Gemara. That we read a couple weeks ago about Yaakov fighting with the angel. And at the crack of dawn, the angel says, "Send me away, I have to go, let me go." So Rashi says, where does the angel have to go? Catch a bus? Like, why does he have to go in the morning? So Rashi quotes the Medrash that angels have to sing praises to God, they have to sing to God. And this angel said that my entire life I never yet had the opportunity to sing to God, and now it's my turn. So you have to let me go, I can sing to God. So the Kozhn Sir Magid says this is a pretty amazing thing. Like what a coincidence. He's entangled with Yaakov, and just at that moment, that's when his appointment is to sing praise to God. Does that make sense? I mean, it's like such a coincidence. Just at that moment, that's when he has to go. So the Kozhn Sir Magid said, it means like this. Who was this angel? What was this angel? The angel was, Chazal say, was the Yetzer Hara itself, was the Satan itself. That, right? The Sarosh Leisav, the guardian angel of Leisav is the Yetzer Hara, is the Satan. When does an angel sing to God? Because every angel sings to God when it has completed its task. When it's completed its mission. That's when it's your turn to sing to God. When you've done your job. Then you go back to report and you sing praises to God. It says, the Yetzer Hara said, in my entire career, I've never yet completed my mission. Because my mission is completed not when I am victorious. My mission is completed when I am defeated. Because the reason God created the Yetzer Hara is not that it should cause people to stumble. The Yetzer Hara was created in order that people should be rewarded for overcoming it. So the Yetzer Hara said, I never had the opportunity to sing praises to God. Because in life, no one ever scored a decisive victory over me. So it's now that Yaakov had him by the neck. So he says, let me go. Now it's my time to sing praise. Now that you've scored a decisive victory, now I can go sing praise to God. But the entire thought, this thought of the Kozhn Sir Magid is based on this Gemara. The Gemara says that they prayed to remove the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. Why? Because it wasn't doing us any good. Now another thing happened at the same time. At the same time that the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah disappeared, Nevuah also disappeared. And this is a fact. The Seder Olam, one of the works of the Tanaim, says that at the beginning of the Bayesheni, this is when the Nevuah disappeared. In fact, the latest prophetic works, the books of Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, are from the First Temple period. They themselves were members of that Beis Din, the Knesset HaGedolah, the Great Assembly, which prayed to remove the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah. They were the last of the prophets. So, is this just a coincidence that at the same time these two things happen? No, they go hand in hand. In other words, we're here in this world to be tested. Either the test will be to do very difficult things, or the test is to make agonizing decisions. One or the other. But if we have perfect clarity on the one hand, and we have no Yetzer Hara on the other hand, what's the test? What's our test? So therefore, when the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah was taken away, so we no longer had the difficult test that we had then. So God said, okay, therefore what will the test be? The test will be that you'll no longer have clarity. You'll no longer know exactly what it is God wants of you. You'll have to figure it out on your own. And therefore, in order to bring about that test, we lost Nevuah, we lost communication from God. Now we're on our own. We've got to figure it out.
So Nevuah continued for a short time after Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah?
No, it was the same time. It was the same time, the exact same time.
The prophets continued to live.
No.
Those few prophets.
No.
After they voted.
No, the prophecy ended just as the temple was built. Just as the temple was built.
Didn't you say that the men of the Great Assembly voted to put an end to...
And they were members of it. Chagat Chaim Malach were members of the Knesset Darchei.
And they lost their prophecy that way.
That was it, and that was the end of their career.
That was the end of their careers as well.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Now it's an amazing thing. If you look at the last book of the prophets, Malachi, the last book, this is the last book of the Nevi'im. So, in the next to the last verse, he says, Zichru Torahs Moshe. Remember the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So, I mean, that's a good message. But the Mefarshim explain that Malachi understood that this is going to be the last prophecy. This is the last communication from God. This is the end. The end. And therefore, the question is, well, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen? If we want to know what God wants of us, from this point downward, who are we going to ask? There's not going to be any prophets. No one is communicating with God. How will we know? So he said, remember the Torah. Remember the Torah. Go back to the Torah, and you'll have to figure it out from the Torah. And this is a very frightening thing. In other words, once upon a time, you go to a prophet, and again, you have to keep in mind that the books of the prophets that we are recorded, the Gemara says the only prophecies that were recorded were prophecies of lasting value. Nevuah that was needed for all time, that had eternal value, those were recorded in books, and those were maintained. But people would go to the Nevi'im for private questions. If you look in the book of Shmuel, right, it says that Shaul's father lost some donkeys, couldn't find the donkeys, so he sent his son Shaul and a servant looking for the donkeys. So he said, we can't find the donkeys, there's only one solution. What do? We go to the Navi, and the Navi will tell us where the donkeys are. Right? And that was considered perfectly appropriate. Right? You lost your car keys, how are you going to find them? So you go to the Navi, and they'll tell you, that's where your donkeys are. That was legitimate. So therefore, if you had decisions to make, now I'm going to university, what should I take? Should I major in pre-med, pre-law, accounting, English literature? But what should I major in? Go to the Navi would tell you. Pre-med. Or whatever the case may be.
But it wasn't his opinion. It was Nevuah.
And it wasn't his opinion. It was God. You want to know what to do, God will tell you.
God says take pre-med.
God says take pre-med. So imagine, think about it for a moment. Imagine living a life like that. Right? No difficult decisions. You need to know what to do. You can find out. You have access to perfect information. So what could the test be in a situation where you have access to that type of information? The test could be, but even though you know what the right thing is, it's very difficult to do it. There's a burning Yetzer Hara to practice idolatry, to worship Baal. Right? And overcoming that is very difficult. That's the test of such a time. Right? Nowadays, we don't have that Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, but we're faced with a different type of test, which is, what should I do? Is this the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? There are pros, there are cons. It affects my family, it affects myself, my parnasa, my livelihood. Yeah. These are the difficult tests that we face. And what is our challenge? Our challenge is that we have to work with the Torah, but the Torah doesn't tell us explicitly. The Torah presents a range of options. Right? There are many options which are seemingly consistent with the Torah. Yeah, there are certain things that are ruled out. Right? If I'm looking for a job, right, and I say, okay, I'm gonna go to the Torah and try to figure out what I should do for a living. So there are certain things you can't do. You practically cannot make cheeseburgers in a McDonald's because cooking a cheeseburger involves putting cheese on meat, and that's cooking basar b'challah, meat, and all that a Jew can't do. So that's ruled out. One of the few jobs that the Torah rules out explicitly. But there are a range of options. And to know what to do really means to delve into Torah in a very deep way, not just in terms of the explicit halacha, but understand Torah values and priorities, what's important. To weigh that, ultimately, yes, from the Torah you can't figure these things out. But it's very, very challenging and that's really the difficulty of life. It's not the question that it's so hard to live up to the right thing. Once we know what the right thing is, the question is it's very difficult to understand what the right thing is. Right? And this really was a change which happened at the period of the beginning of the Second Temple. And what is amazing is that at this same time, right, there was an explosion in terms of the development of the Torah Shabbal Peh, of the oral Torah, meaning in the sense of original interpretation. And perhaps the reason for this was because as it became so necessary to delve into the Torah, because the Torah now had to be used not only as a source for explicit halacha, but it had to be a source for guidance in every area of life, which previously was supplied by the Navi. So as people delved into the Torah, they revealed new aspects, new interpretations, new possibilities. And that's why at the same time that Nevuah ends, we find a tremendous development of Chidushei Torah, new insights in Torah, which of course later were incorporated into the Mishnah, into the Gemara, and it all comes from this time. Another reason for that explosion in Torah Shabbal Peh was because something else happened, which was that the persecutions of the enemies, of the oppressors, led to a situation where Torah had to be, in a sense, reinvented again and again and again. This is a very, very deep thing. Let's try to understand it. Let's say I'm a master of Torah. I've studied Torah, I've delved into Torah, I know Torah backwards and forwards, I've revealed many hidden insights in Torah. I have it all. And I would like to transmit it to my students. If we live in peaceful times, so the students can sit at my feet for the 30 years which would be necessary to acquire all that wisdom I wish to transmit. But what if the situation is such where there is tension, there is conflict, there is war, there are persecutions? Some of the persecutions are directed specifically against those who teach Torah and those who study Torah. So now Torah has to be studied in cellars, on the sly, in the odd times where we can get away with it without getting caught. That isn't conducive to the transmission of large bodies of information which have to be preserved accurately. And this is a very serious problem. A very serious problem. And as a result, we have the beginnings of machlokas, of division. We have the beginnings of dispute. And the Rambam writes that when did machlokas begin? Machlokas began when you have, says the Gemara, the Talmidim of Shammai and Hillel They didn't apprentice under their mentors as long as they should have. This is when there was an explosion of machlokas in Yisrael. Now, what does that mean? We're not blaming them. The reason they couldn't apprentice is because of the persecutions. But since they weren't able to receive the total package from their mentors, not in terms of information and not in terms of methodology, therefore they were in a sense half-baked, and as a result each group came to different conclusions on fundamental points of Jewish law. We have the explosion of dispute, which of course we suffer from to this very day. Today there's hardly a point in Jewish law which isn't disputed as a consequence of this. When did Machlokas begin? Machlokas began, the Gemara says, in the battle against Yavan. This is where Machlokas began. When Yavan made the Gzeirus, they made the decrees against the Torah, as we say in Al-Nisim, Hashkicham Torah Secha, this is where Machlokas began. But the irony is that the loss of clarity forces us to do what? To double and redouble our efforts to reclaim Torah knowledge. So now we don't have a complete tradition handed down from our masters, so we have to reinvent the wheel. Now, reinventing the wheel, unfortunately, is a difficult thing to do, but that's what ended up happening. And in every generation, the Chachmei Yisrael, the Sage of Israel, went back to the Torah, back to the original materials, and worked them through and made the necessary derivations to, in a sense, reconstitute, put back together the Torah that was lost. The footnote, Zecher Tzaddik Lebracha, points out an amazing thing, that Yavan made decrees, L'hashkichim Torah Sech, that we should forget the Torah, but those decrees ultimately were counterproductive. They led to a virtual explosion of Torah. So we're talking about, in the early Second Temple period, we're talking about a historical transition where there was a total transformation. There was, in the First Temple period, there was perfect clarity because there was peace and tranquility. There were prophets, so we had communication from God. We had the ability of mentors to pass Torah down to their students, preserving with perfect accuracy the traditions of earlier generations. So we knew exactly what to do, both on the Torah side and on the prophecy side. What was the challenge? Overcoming that great Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. In the Second Temple period, everything changes. First, we lose Nevuah. Secondly, because of the decrees of the Yavanim, we lose clarity in Torah. And that means, again, we have to go back to the Torah and figure it out. And therefore, even though, on the one hand, yes, there's no Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, we're faced with an even greater challenge of knowing exactly what it is God wants of it. That's very, very, very difficult. The question is, what is the connection of this historic period of Chanuka, which is the beginning of the Second Temple period? What is the connection to the Parshias? It's exactly that. Chazal tell us that everything that happens to the Avos happens to the later generations. And the Ramban develops this theme, Maisa Avos Simen Lebanim. The transition from Yaakov to Yosef is exactly this. As Yaakov is a throwback to the First Temple time. Yaakov has prophecy. Yaakov has clarity. Yaakov knows exactly what he has to do. The Nisyonis of the Avos are different. Their Nisyonis are doing very difficult things. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are all subjected to very difficult challenges, but it's not a question of what they should do. They know exactly what they should do. Right? Yaakov knew exactly what he had to do with Esau. Right? Rivka was a Neviah, she was a prophetess. She had a Nevuah that Rabbi Avod Zohir, that the younger will enslave the older, or vice versa, that the older will be enslaved by the younger. She knew that there was a divine preference for Yaakov. So Yaakov had to steal the blessings. It was a difficult thing. It was a very difficult thing emotionally for him. But he knew what he had to do. Those are the tests of Yaakov. Yosef, in the next generation, has a different set of tests. Because you don't have that clarity. Now we're dealing with dreams. Right? Dreams are just sets of options, sets of choices. You have to figure out what is the right thing to do. That's really the historical period that begins with the Chanuka story. And therefore the transition between Yaakov and Yosef really is exactly the transition from the period of the first base of Mikdash to the second base of Mikdash. It's the whole story of Chanuka, the changes in the structure of Klal Yisrael that changed the very nature of our lives, and to a great extent we, of course, are living lives that are very, very much like Yosef and very much not like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov have the benefit of clarity. Their challenges are overcoming the resistance, the internal resistance to doing the right thing. For us, the nisyonos that we face for the most part are the questions, what should I do? What is the right thing to do? Right? And that really, those are the nisyonos of Yosef. So really, these parshas very much parallel the historical developments in Klal Yisrael, which the Chanuka story marks. And of course, these are the problems we have. The best advice we can follow is that advice of Malachi, of Zichru Torah's Moshe, that ultimately the answers all are in Torah. But you have to dig deep. Chazal say, hafach ba d'chayla ba. You have to turn it over and investigate and examine it carefully. Everything is really there. Everything is there. But it's not there on the surface. If you read it superficially, right, you'll have no guidance at all. And not only will you have no guidance, you'll make the fundamental error of thinking that the Torah has no position on my decision. The Torah has doesn't address my concerns, because the issues it deals with are so different than what I have to deal with. And that's a mistake. I'll just tell you a story. We'll end with the story. I told it many times, but it's just a great story. The idea that even a Gemara, you learn a Gemara, and you don't relate it to your everyday life. And in reality, the Gemara is speaking to you. So there's a story like this. Rabbi Eliezer Breitowitz, the great ethical teacher of the Jewish people in the 1800s, once at the end of his life, he lived in Germany. Little known fact. He died in Germany. And he once was visited by a number of Rabbanim. And in those days, the German Rabbanim wore top hats. Very hard, stiff top hats. And as he escorted them out, he told them, it was a very windy day, he told them, you have to be very careful. It's a windy day, you should hold your hat on securely, because the Gemara Bava Kama says that on a windy day, you have to hold your hat on your head very securely. So these Rabbanim were experts in the entire Talmud, and they said, the Rabbi Salanter says, there is no Gemara in Masechtas Bava Kama that says that on a windy day you have to hold your hat down. So we said, no, it's a Gemara, an explicit Gemara that says on a windy day you have to hold your hat down. He says, where is such a Gemara? So he said like this, there's a Gemara that says the following, that what if you have a stone, a rack, and you put a rack on the roof of a building, and the wind blows the rack off and causes damage? The Gemara Bava Kama says you're liable, because you put the rack in a place so the wind could blow it off and cause damage. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. It says, does it have to be a rack? What if it was a hat? You put a hat on the roof, and the wind blew off the hat, and the hat injured somebody. Would that make a difference? Would the halacha be the same? The same? Okay. Now it says you put the rack or the hat on a roof. Would it have to be a roof? What if it was the top of your head? Right? Would the halacha be the same? Well, it'll be the same. Okay, so the Gemara says, if you put a hat on your head, and the wind blows it off, and it hits somebody, you're liable for the damage. So it's an explicit Gemara Bava Kama that on a windy day, you have to hold your hat securely. It shouldn't blow off and hit somebody. It says, that's the idea. Even in the Gemara, which is more transparent, we can read the Gemara 100 times, and we wouldn't realize that it's really telling us that when we walk on the windy day, you have to hold your hat on securely. It shouldn't hurt somebody. It's an amazing, amazing thing. But if we're so slanted, they'll read the Gemara that way. When it comes to the Chumash, it's even more difficult to fathom what it's getting at. So we have to examine it very, very carefully. The answers are there, but that's the only solution we have. We don't have prophets. We don't have divine inspiration. All we have is the Torah, Zichru Torah's Moshe. But that is the challenge of our time. The challenge of our time is to know that that's where the answers are, and to look for them, and if we can't find them ourselves, to get help. Okay, everyone have a very, very happy Chanuka. Next week we will have a class.
Oh, good.
Bezras Hashem. We will. 1 week from tonight. What candle will that be? It'll be the seventh candle.